He left with one sentence, but it echoed louder than every promise he ever made. I can't do this. I'm sorry, that's all it took. No ring. No fight. No explanation. And there I was standing in a wedding dress while my mother wiped a tear thinking it was from joy. She said he's going to cry when he sees you. He did cry, but not with me. Not for me. That was the day I realized you don't always get closure. Sometimes you just get silence. And silence has weight. It presses down. Like lace over a bruise. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I didn't even blink. I stepped off the platform, took off the heels, and walked out of the bridal shop with a dress still zipped halfway down my spine. The candle by the register was still burning lavender and lemon, same scent as always. The shop owner, Lindsay, said nothing. Just watched me go like she already knew what the text had said. I don't remember how I drove home. Only that the road was quiet and the radio played a song I had planned for the walk down the aisle. I didn't take off the dress. Not when I got to the porch. Not when I stepped inside. Not when I lay flat on the bedroom floor and watched the ceiling fade into evening. I called. Once. No answer. Then again. Straight to voicemail. Texted, emailed. Nothing. He didn't just back out of the wedding, he erased himself. I lay there in full silk and silence, wondering how a man could just vanish like love had an exit plan I never got to read. My mother knocked once. She must have followed me back. She asked if I was okay. I said nothing. She stood in the hallway. Didn't come in, didn't sit down, didn't ask for the dress back. Maybe she knew that heartbreak isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just still. Later that night, I thought about my students. I used to tell them, if a character doesn't show up, the plot shifts. It hit different now. The lace was already paid for. The flowers were on their way. But the groom, he ghosted me in real life. Not just in a story. And I didn't cancel the venue. I didn't cancel me. In Bozeman, secrets travel faster than wildfire, especially when they come with a photo and a caption. I woke up to 12 unread messages. Most were just links, no words, no explanations. Just, have you seen this? I tapped the first one. A picture loaded slowly like it was taking its time to burn. Gavin. In Napa. With her. Her hand on his chest, his mouth against her temple. A vineyard behind them. The caption read, "No more pretending." I sat up. My apartment was still half-packed from the wedding rush boxes labeled reception decor, guest favors, his and hers mugs. The mugs were mocking me now. I didn't cry, but my hands shook. The kind of tremble that comes not from pain but from clarity. A knock at the door. Too sharp to be anyone else. Linda. She walked in without waiting. Saw the photo already open on my screen. Didn't blink. I told you not to give him everything, she said. Her voice wasn't sad. It was strategic. You need to get ahead of this, she continued. Say it was mutual. Say you both agreed. Say you're taking a break, something clean. I said nothing. Linda stared at me like I was broken merchandise. Claire, she snapped. Do not make this a spectacle. That's when she slapped me. Not hard, not dramatic. But cold. Like flicking dust off a sleeve. We both froze. It was the first time. Then she stepped back, straightened her coat. Don't drag our name through a pity show, she said. And left. The door clicked shut, but the echo stayed. In small towns, shame is currency. And that photo, it was worth more than any apology. So I did what I always do, I stayed quiet. By evening the inbox had quieted. Not because people stopped talking, but because they'd moved on, to talking without me. The only knock this time was softer. 2 raps. Pause. 1 more, Eli. He didn't say much. Just handed over a plastic container with chilies still warm and a bottle of ginger ale wrapped in a napkin. There was a post-it on top. Eat what you can. Don't answer everyone. He didn't wait for a thank you. Didn't even step inside. Eli always knew when words made things worse. I set the food on the counter unopened, then walked to the kitchen table. The RSVP list was still there, half highlighted. Names. Addresses. Notes like +1 confirmed or vegetarian option. I stared at it for a long time. Not reading, just remembering. Then I struck a match. Held it above the edge. The flame took slow. Like it didn't want to do the job. But it did. Page after page I watched it curl. Turn to ash. Disintegrate. But I didn't burn everything. I opened the drawer by the window. Pulled out a folded sheet of paper. My vows. The draft version written on a sleepy afternoon weeks ago in a cafe where the barista spelled my name Claire. I unfolded it. The ink had faded just a little from the coffee steam. At the top in my handwriting it read, "You are the safest place I have ever known." I read it once. Then again. Each word hitting like truth that had soured. Finally I whispered, not angry, not loud, just final. I was wrong. Outside the sky had turned purple-blue, the kind of color you only see in early fall when the wind smells like leaves that haven't dropped yet. I walked out to the backyard. Found the box of wedding favors. Little jars of honey tied with lace ribbon, each with a tag meant to be C+G. I didn't throw them. Didn't smash or burn or bury. I stacked them back into the box, carefully, one by one. Closed the lid. Wrote in Sharpie, "For memory's sake," and slid the box under the porch steps. Some endings don't come with fireworks, some just sit there quiet waiting to stop hurting. People came to see a wedding. They still got one. Just not the kind with rings or kisses. No aisle runner. No veil. I stood in front of my mirror that morning, lace sleeves sliding gently down my arms, and told my reflection, "You're going." There wasn't a single part of me that felt ready. But sometimes showing up is the only thing left to do. The Emerson Cultural Center still smelled like flowers. Leftover baby's breath and eucalyptus tied to each chair in tight satin bows. The arch was still standing. A little crooked from the wind, but full of color. Guests sat in small clusters. Whispers. Eyes shifting. Phones half raised. I didn't look for familiar faces, didn't need to. The only person I glanced at was Eli. Standing near the back, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. But when I met his eyes, he gave a nod. And that was enough. No music played as I walked down the aisle. Only the soft creak of wood under my heels. And the breeze pushing faintly through the glass doors behind me. I held no bouquet. Only a folded piece of paper in my hand. The same one I saved. The same one that once said, "You are the safest place I have ever known." But I'd written something new. I stepped onto the platform, turned to face them. Some looked away. Some looked confused. My mother sat in the front row, hands clenched in her lap. She didn't say a word. I took a breath. One. Deep and slow. Then I spoke. "Thank you for coming. I was supposed to marry someone today. But he didn't show up. So, I did." No one moved. I unfolded the paper, not rushed, not shaking. And I began to read. These were supposed to be vows to another person. But I'm offering them now to the one person I forgot for far too long. Myself. I paused. Let the silence settle. Even silence has a voice. My therapist used to say that. I vow to stop shrinking to fit someone else's version of love. I vow to stop pretending that silence is safer than truth. I vow to choose clarity over comfort. To choose honesty even when it costs me everything I thought I wanted. No one whispered now. Even the trees outside seemed still. I don't have an audience for these vows. No ring. No minister. No partner standing beside me. I folded the paper slowly, slipped it into the side pocket of my dress. But I do have this moment. And I do have me. I stepped down from the platform. No one clapped. Not at first. Then I heard a single chair scrape back. Footsteps. Eli. He stood. Hands by his side. And he clapped. Twice. Firm, steady. Someone else followed. Then, another. Until the whole room was filled with soft applause. No cheers, no standing ovation, just a quiet rising sound like wind through dry leaves. Not celebrating a wedding, but acknowledging a woman who stayed. I walked back down the aisle. Alone. But taller. The kind of alone that felt earned, like when the storm ends and you're the one holding the last umbrella. That night, I didn't check my phone. But someone did post a video of me standing on that platform, holding that piece of paper. The caption read, "She didn't marry him. She married herself." I didn't record it, but someone did. The apartment was still dark when I opened my eyes. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like it had something urgent to say. Inside, it was just me. Me and the sound of my phone buzzing. At first, I thought it was an alarm. But when I turned it over, it didn't stop. Messages, mentions, notifications, names I didn't know. My speech, if you could even call it that, was now a video. Not on my feed, not on Eli's. Someone in the third row must have recorded it. The caption read, "She didn't marry him, she married herself." I set the phone down, wrapped the fleece throw around my shoulders, walked to the window and stared at the gold leaves falling on the sidewalk. I wasn't ready to be a symbol. I hadn't even folded the dress yet. By 9 a.m., the inbox was at 241 unread. Some were from strangers, others from high school friends I hadn't spoken to in years. A few from guests who'd been there who said nothing that day but wrote paragraphs now. But I didn't open them, not until I saw the name I did recognize. Maya P., a former student from my senior creative writing class 5 years ago. I clicked it open. "Miss Carver, I saw the video. I just want to say you always taught us that voice matters more than volume. Thank you for proving it." I didn't cry. But my chest tightened like my own words had circled back with a lesson I didn't expect to receive. I sat at the kitchen table. No coffee, no breakfast. Just me staring at that message. In the middle of all the noise, that one line stood still. And I heard something I hadn't let myself believe until now. I hadn't lost everything. I had finally spoken. I was still rereading Maya's message when I heard the knock. 3 taps. Soft but not unsure. When I opened the door, Linda stood there. No lipstick. No pearls. Just a cardigan too thin for the cold and a mug of tea in her hand. "Chamomile," she said, holding it out like a peace offering. I thought maybe. She didn't finish. I stepped aside. She walked in, sat on the edge of the couch like it might reject her. The mug stayed untouched. Steam curled upward and vanished. "I didn't come to fight," she said after a long silence. "That makes one of us," I answered quietly. She looked older than she did a week ago. Or maybe I was just seeing her without all the layers. "I thought I was helping," she finally said. By controlling everything. Linda didn't argue. Just stared down at her hands like she wanted to shrink inside them. "You wanted a bride," I said. "A picture, a performance." I wanted a voice. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. Sometimes silence is more honest than any apology. When she left, the mug stayed on the coffee table. Still full, still warm. Later that evening, I printed one comment from a stranger. Just one. It read, "I didn't know I was allowed to do this." I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk, right between an old syllabus and the last grocery list I'd made with Gavin. The ink from that list had already started to fade, but this message, it felt new. Alive. I opened my journal. Wrote slowly, not to be profound. Just to be clear, I am not what they left. I am what I chose. And just as I was about to close the page, a new email arrived. From a local women's publication. Subject line, "Would you be open to writing an essay about what you did?" I stared at it. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I finally knew it. Something I didn't say. There were things I meant to say, but I wasn't ready yet. Snow blanketed the street outside my apartment, the kind that looked soft until you stepped in it and realized how cold it really was. I stood by the window, my fingertips wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug Eli had brought over last week. Cinnamon tea, lukewarm now, but comforting in a way that didn't demand anything back. It had been months since the aisle. Since the speech. Since the applause I didn't expect. People had asked if I was proud of what I did, if it was empowering. Sometimes I nodded. Sometimes I smiled politely. But mostly I stayed quiet. Not out of shame, not anymore, just reflection. Dr. Reyes's office was on the second floor of an old brick building near the steep mountain tea house. The first time I walked in, I hesitated at the door. Not because I didn't want help, but because I wasn't sure which version of myself I was supposed to bring. She didn't rush me. She didn't say, "Let's start at the beginning." Instead, she asked if I wanted a blanket. I said no. But later I was grateful it was there. My fiancé left me, I said that first session. By text. A few days before the wedding. Dr. Reyes didn't flinch. She simply nodded and waited. I didn't cry, I added. Not for days. And now she asked. Now, I think I'm afraid of how much I didn't feel. We sat with that. Then I told her about the speech. About how I stood in front of everyone and read vows I wrote for someone who didn't show up but ended up reading them to myself. I watched her eyes soften as I described the silence in the room, the creak of folding chairs, Eli's nod. You gave something, she said gently, that day. Even if it was to yourself. I looked down at the chipped edge of my mug. But I kept something too. Something I never said. We paused again. Out the window, snow started to fall again, soft and fast. The walls of my apartment still smelled faintly of fresh paint. Eli had helped me repaint the guest room the week before, just the two of us, silent but present. I chose a pale green, something between seafoam and eucalyptus. Not quite cheerful. Not sad either. He didn't ask what the room was for, and I didn't explain. We painted in parallel. When I spilled a few drops, he handed me a rag without a word. When his phone rang, he let it go to voicemail. There was a grace to the way he didn't press. That kind of silence felt like safety. Later, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. A single tab. Blank document. The cursor blinking like a quiet dare. My fingers hovered over the keys. My therapist once said, the hardest story to write is the one we survive before we understand. I typed one sentence. The day I didn't get married was the first day I met myself fully. Then I stopped. Not because I didn't have more to say, but because something inside me wanted to mark this moment differently. I bundled up and walked to the creek near my apartment. The same place I used to visit as a teenager when I needed quiet. The water was partially frozen, the edges lined with fragile silvery ice. I brought the original vow draft with me. The one I never read out loud, the one written for Gavin. I sat on the cold wooden bench, pulled the paper from my coat pocket, and read the words slowly. They didn't sound like mine anymore. Then I tore them into small pieces carefully, deliberately, and let them fall into the water. The fragments floated, caught in little whirlpools before drifting under the ice. I didn't cry. But I did whisper something I hadn't before. Goodbye. When I got home, I opened that same document and changed the title. The day I married myself. Then I hit send. Walking past the arch. The arch was still there. Twined with new silk flowers and early lilacs, it stood at the edge of the lawn outside the Emerson Cultural Center, just as it had last fall. Only now the petals weren't white. They were soft pink, almost careless in the breeze. I didn't stop walking. It was late March, the kind of spring day Montana offers, like an apology, clear skies, the faint scent of thawed earth, just enough warmth to unzip your jacket, but not enough to take it off. I held my notebook under one arm, thumb tucked into the worn leather binding like I used to carry textbooks in college. Someone else's rehearsal was happening nearby. A woman in pale blue heels laughed and swatted her fiancé's shoulder with a folded piece of paper. Their photographer circled them, calling out poses in a cheery tone. Her voice bounced between the trees. I could have taken another route. I knew the side street well, but I didn't. Not today. I slowed just a little. Just enough to see without staring. There was no ache, no jealousy, no flash of memory that pulled me under. Just a distant hum of something familiar. Like recognizing a song you used to love but no longer need to sing. I found an empty bench down the path and sat. The wood was warm from the sun and the notebook settled quietly in my lap. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I watched the wind catch the hem of the bride's dress, still in rehearsal, not real, and, for a flicker of a moment, I wondered what she feared most. And then I turned away. Not out of defiance, just readiness. I flipped the notebook open to a blank page and wrote, "To the woman I became, I see you now." I sat on that bench longer than I meant to. The wind picked up, teasing loose strands of my hair across my cheek. Somewhere behind me, someone cheered, the kind of cheer you give when the flower girl gets it right. I smiled quietly to no one. Then I stood, notebook tucked under my arm again, and walked home. At the apartment, the light slanted low through the blinds. The floor creaked the way it always did in the afternoon. I put the kettle on, knowing exactly how long it took for the water to roll. That rhythm felt like mine now. A small package had arrived earlier, a photo from Eli. It wasn't a message, just an image. A wooden bookshelf. Simple, sturdy. He had made it from reclaimed pine. The caption underneath was just 3 words. "If you want." I didn't reply right away. I didn't have to. Some people speak in gestures. I set the photo against the counter, poured tea into the mug I used when I needed to feel calm, blue ceramic chipped at the handle, and sat at the kitchen table. Next to my tea was a small stack of printed emails. Messages from women. Most I'd never met. Some used their real names, some didn't. They wrote about their own non-weddings, or the jobs they left, or the mothers they disappointed. One wrote simply, "You reminded me I could change my story." I didn't feel proud exactly, just settled. Peace, I've learned, isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or applause. It comes in the quiet moments when you realize you're not bracing anymore. I got up and walked to the closet. In the back, behind the winter coats and an old vacuum cleaner, sat the last unopened wedding box. The tape had yellowed slightly at the edges. I carried it to the living room, set it on the rug, and opened the flaps. Inside, ribbon scraps, a guest book we never used, a candle labeled June Blossom. I took each item out gently. Not like it was precious. Just part of a life I once expected. Then I gathered the packing paper and the box and walked it down to the recycling bin. The lid creaked. The cardboard folded with a soft collapse. And that was it. That night, I didn't turn on the overhead light. Just a small candle by the window. Its glow danced softly across the wall like a room finally exhaling after holding its breath too long. I curled into the corner of the couch, notebook resting on my lap, not as a shield anymore, but as a companion. There was no deadline. No one waiting to read. Just me and the words I once feared to write. I don't remember how long I wrote. Maybe it was just a few lines. Maybe just a thought. But I remember the moment I closed the notebook. There was no grand realization. No thunder in my chest. Just a quiet understanding I didn't need the arch. I didn't need the applause. I didn't need to rewrite what was lost. I simply needed to live what was still mine. I slipped the notebook onto the bookshelf, yes, the one Eli had made, and poured the last of my tea. The candle flickered once, then steadied. Outside, the wind moved through the lilacs. And I walked to the window, barefoot, unhurried. Somewhere in town, another rehearsal dinner was wrapping up. Some other version of what I once wanted. I watched for a moment, then turned away. And this time, there was no audience. And I liked it that way. I didn't stop walking at the arch. Not because I was bitter, but because I finally knew I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Sometimes we spend so long waiting for someone to choose us, we forget we were allowed to choose ourselves first. And healing doesn't always look like a big decision, it's often a quiet one. Like lighting a candle. Or packing the last box. If this story touched something in you, a memory, a silence, A vow once whispered, I'd love to hear what it meant. Leave me a thought, I'll be reading.